So he's been watching this man for 6 days. He knows the route he drives to work, the time he leaves, the car. He's never been in the same country as him. He's sitting in a bunker in a desert in America, thousands of miles away. The order comes through. He moves the cursor and pushes the button. He then gets in his own car, drives home, and his wife asks him, "How was your day?" He says, "Fine." Before I go any further into this episode, I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. I'm going to talk about a technology that end goal is to kill people. And that is an uncomfortable position. Like, that's just an uncomfortable technology completely. And it's not something that I find very easy to talk about or take lightly in any sense. And I'm not saying any of the stuff today that I talk about is good. I'm just trying to understand what this technology is doing to us. So please, this is not... I find it uncomfortable to talk about things that are used in war, just because I don't think that they should get the time of day. But I do... there's some interesting technology that's being developed there, and I do, on the other side of the coin, think that should be talked about, so we kind of know what is going on. At least I wanted to educate myself a little bit more on this, so that's why I went down this hole, and that's why I'm sharing it here. But if this makes you uncomfortable, please click away. Today I'm going to be talking about remotely powered drones. The ones where humans authorize the strikes from very far away. And they've been used since the early 2000s. Apparently, the US Predator and Reaper are quite well known. If you know a little bit about this, you would know about these. I didn't. But now there's even a newer category. They are lethal autonomous weapon systems inside drones that have the ability to identify a target and then engage with said target without a human even being in the loop. And according to the internet, a very well documented example of this is the Turkish-made Kargu 2, and then a United Nations panel of experts in Libya reported that in 2021 that the Kargu 2 drones have appeared to engage autonomously with targets in some instances in 2020. They were basically programmed to attack without having a live human operator, and that scares the living shit out of me. The report that I was reading doesn't confirm that anyone was killed by this drone, but the details remain a little bit unclear. But this is the best that I've got to showcase the use of these drones without any human intervention. Now, during December 2024, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution calling for international regulation of these weapons. 166 countries voted in favor of it, 3 opposed. So, I guess as technology has evolved, or let me say wartime technology has evolved, more and more distance between the person doing the killing and then the person unfortunately losing their life. We started off with, I don't know, all the way back, swords. You kind of had to be very, very close to someone to you could almost look in their eyes and see it. And as you move further, then you've got a little bit more distance with guns. And then you look at bombs that are dropped where you just drop it and you don't necessarily see the person's face. So it feels like, obviously, I assume different things are used in wars for different reasons, but from an outsider's perspective, you can see how, as technology has evolved, more distance is being put between those two. And does it make it easier because there is more distance? Hopefully I'll be able to answer that question a little bit more today as we go through this. Because now we're at the drone phase, because that distance is further than any of the distance that we've had before. But he sees the target very clearly. And I think that's an interesting one, is that when you had the planes that drop bombs, whatever, they didn't see the person's face. With a drone, you can zoom into their exact emotions. So does that add to it or take away? I don't know. So here's what seems to be my major question about these things. Does distance make a difference? At least morally. There's a philosopher called Peter Singer. He was a professor of bioethics who argued that the distance shouldn't make a difference. In an essay he wrote in 1972, he said, "It makes no moral difference whether the person I could help is standing next to me or is on the other side of the world. The outcome is the same. The distance is just geography." And you know what? I agree with that logic. Obviously, there are caveats in terms of what does help mean, all of those kind of things, but the logic, I think, is sound. But then there's a researcher at Harvard called Joshua Green, and he ran a different kind of experiment. He put people in brain scanners, so MRIs, and showed them a problem. The classic trolley problem. But this one, he said, here's a runaway trolley that's going to hit 5 people. And if you pull the lever, you can kill 1 person instead of the 5. And most people say, yeah, I'll pull it, obviously, because then I'm going to save 4 people, effectively. Now, he used the same problem, but a different version of it. The only way to stop the trolley is to actually physically push someone off a bridge with your own hands. So, same outcome. 1 will die, 5 will be saved. But most people say no, they can't do it. And Green found that the difference was in the brain. When harm was done up close with your own hands, your emotional systems, they activated and fired I was going to say very a lot, that's terrible. They fired a lot. When there was a lever, there was a little bit of difference between you and the outcome. And it didn't, in the brain, fire in the same way. So Singer, our philosopher, says that emotional reaction is morally irrelevant. But that reaction, that hesitation, is what I would like to believe is the feeling that makes people hesitate before actually killing someone. And if you remove that emotional firing, that hesitation, there might be some consequences to it. So if we look at what does the research actually say about people that are doing this? Because the assumption is if you're thousands of kilometers away, pressing a button must feel easier. But the data says something a little bit more complicated than that. A study published in the Journal of Anxiety Disorders in 2014 looked at over 1,000 US Air Force drone operators. It found that 4.3% of them met the criteria for PTSD symptoms in a moderate to more severe level. And that is lower than the rate of soldiers that are returning from deployment who actually had physical guns, which runs between 10 and 18%, according to the study. But that's much higher than what the military records have been saying. They're sitting around less than 1%. And the character or the type of trauma is a little bit different too. Drone operators, they often are watching their targets for hours or days on end before they strike. They see routines. They sometimes see their families, well, the family of the person they're tracking. And one could make an argument that they develop this strange intimacy or parasocial-esque relationship with the person that they're tracking. And this is with a person that they're about to kill. And I think this is more intense than one that a soldier on a field is experiencing. There's something different about that. Does it make it more human rather than, oh, you're just a target that I need to do, that's my job, versus, oh, you're a human. You have a human life. And researchers, they describe this as some sort of psychological whiplash, where 2 completely different worlds and no physical transition between them. Standard PTSD treatment was designed around fear, the fear of being in danger, of witnessing violence close up. It doesn't really map well onto what these drone operators are experiencing, which is far less about fear and more about the moral weight of what they're doing and how they need to like live their life afterwards. Now, if we take the human out completely, an autonomous weapon makes the decision. It identifies the target and then it strikes. And no human had any, okay, let me not make that claim so bold. There was no human that authorized, okay, go now. And there's a philosopher called Robert Sparrow, and he's written about what happens in that point. He calls it the responsibility gap, because the engineer wrote the algorithm, the general state gave the parameters, the politician approved the program. Nobody killed anyone. The system did. And the weight of that, whatever weight that is, gets spread thin across people, right? So it then begs the question through this discussion that we've had today. Does all of this make killing easier? And it's difficult for me to explicitly answer this because I've never been in a position. I don't ever want to be in a position to experience this, to give my own anecdotal answer. But from looking at it from the outside, I think it does. But I think it's a little bit more nuanced and specific than just, yeah, I think it does make killing easier. The drone operated data shows that the psychological cost of the result of the engagement doesn't disappear. It just changes a little bit. It becomes something harder to treat, harder to name, harder to like validate in yourself, and harder to talk about. The whiplash, the moral injury, the drive home, it's still a heavy cost, and that burden sits with that person. But there's a psychologist called Albert Bandura who spent decades understanding how ordinary people do harmful things without feeling like they've done harmful things. And one of his core findings was the diffusion of responsibility. And it's the idea that when a harmful act is done, but it's kind of divided through multiple people, each person kind of shares the moral weight of the outcome. And that moral weight is a little bit smaller, so you feel it less intensely. The best way I can think about it, like in a team situation at work or whatever, something goes terribly wrong. And yeah, you can blame one person or the whole team can kind of take the weight of this, and then it just feels less kind of thing. I think that's the thought that he was getting at. And he also found in an earlier study that aggression actually increased when responsibility was diffused amongst a group rather than like taken on by one person, which is a little bit counterintuitive. And I think this is what autonomous weapons do to this like chain of responsibility. The engineer, the programmer, the general, the politician, each one did something and made certain decisions in isolation that seem reasonable. I'm putting a caveat there. Reasonable. And then when all the technology was put together, the system did the rest. And in that scenario, no one felt like they pulled the trigger, or no one wanted to even believe that they pulled the trigger. Because technically, nobody did. I think humans do a great job of trying to reason our way out of certain things. And I think we get to a bigger question that I think has been on my mind a lot, and I haven't like spoken about it because of like the onset of the current world and the wars that are happening and the decisions being made and like the people in power. Like it's all really scary. And because we have said technology, does it make the decision to go to war easier? Because war always had this human, very, very human cost to it. And it wasn't just the people that were dying in war, but also those that were doing the killing. And the cost of that, I think, was part of the calculation to make the decision to go to war. Because soldiers, they come home changed people. And I think people giving orders to other people to do certain things knew what the orders meant. And I think that carries a significant weight too. And now, if that weight gets lighter for every party along this chain, what happens then? Is it just easier in general? Thus, we will see more stuff happening? I don't know. I'm not sure. It freaks me out a little bit. Um, I really don't have that much more to say about this. I do think it's important to talk about it. But yeah, it makes me very uncomfortable. I'm not gonna lie to you. I feel, yeah, I struggle to talk about it just because of, yeah, what